Greetings, everybody. How you doing? This is Kinesiology 234. This is a quick presentation regarding safety. This is by no means an exhaustive representation of how to fully mitigate risk and provide a completely safe environment, but it should give you some food for thought and the ability to kind of evaluate situations better. And as you move forward with your clients, be able to program better, to be able to understand you're putting your client in a situation that's potentially risky. It's your job to mitigate that. So when a trainer is hired, there's an implication of service. The services that you provide will be that you're a highly skilled individual in the movement, you're as a movement practitioner, and as a movement practitioner, you'll be able to take your client through a training session. Most clients don't even conceptualize or worry about the concept of risk or safety in the training environment. It's not even something that's on the forefront of their thought. They're more worried about their goals and how to achieve their goals and how to come in and get their workout and not look like a fool in front of everybody at the facility. So for them, they won't recognize, they won't even see potential hazards because one, they're not just familiar with the environment, but also, quite frankly, their brain is completely somewhere else. They're not even thinking about risk management. So it's up to the trainer to be able to provide not only a great workout service, but a service that provides a safe environment. And that's part of your skill set, and it has to be one of your pieces of your puzzle. And no doubt about it, there is absolutely a presumption of risk on behalf of the client when they fill out their contract to join a facility that's outlined to them. And many times that's kind of glossed over, but they sign away the fact that they understand there's some presumption of risk just by engaging in an exercise program. But again, you're trying to find ways to mitigate that risk and frankly, limit your own exposure. And it comes down to just having this kind of like awareness of risk and where things can be risky within the facility itself, and then being able to manage either the situation or the risk at hand so you can actually put your client in a safe environment. So you have to have good situational awareness. You have to understand in the facility where there might be risky situations. You have to be able to recognize those quickly, and you have to be able to recognize those proactively and do so as a way to circumnavigate them and kind of get around and away from those risky situations. And you in some regard as a trainer, your ability is nothing more than to observe and then inform somebody else that they have to fix something or they have to wipe something up or there's a cable crossover handle that's about ready to be worn out. So in that regard, it's not your role to fix it. It's just your role to inform regarding a potential hazardous situation. But as a person who is steering the training session, the trainer is the one who has to take the client, steer them away from that potential hazard. You can kind of categorize these into two main content areas, one of which being behavioral, the other which is being environmental. And I've alluded to some of those on the environmental side in terms of within the facility or the actual equipment in the facility. On the behavioral side, you can have trainers who are just completely oblivious to their surroundings and others working around them, throwing medicine balls in a high density environment. Perhaps you have members who are just not really versed on working out and they're performing exercises that are higher risk and as a result are potentially putting others around them at risk. As a trainer, you can control whether or not you engage with those individuals. But the other part of this on the behavioral side is training protocols. You dictate as a trainer reps, sets, exercise. So your exercise selection and the protocols that you use are selected by the trainer. So as a result, you have some control in what you're actually doing. Also, I broke this out two different ways. One is utilizing the incorrect equipment for the desired result, and the other is utilizing equipment incorrectly. So for example, you can get on a piece of equipment, try to manipulate it and change it a little bit to fit an exercise movement pattern you're looking for, and it's completely misusing the piece of equipment. And then the other side of this is you can use equipment, for example, that's not intended to be thrown around, like a small implement, and perhaps you're using equipment and you're actually kind of throwing it around. So there's different ways to look at that in terms of how you use equipment and how you can categorize those too. So the big thing is, equipment is subject to continual wear and tear in a fitness facility. So it's going to have, through the usage patterns, definitely wear and tear patterns. And so as a person who's directing the workouts, you can't control that. Equipment's going to break down no matter what, but you can steer your clients away from pieces of equipment that might be broken. If you are completely married to a piece of leg equipment, like a leg extension, and I'm telling you, that's a high demand piece of equipment that will break down, you have to have the ability as a professional to be able to have alternative exercises in your hip pocket ready to go so you don't put your client in a hazardous situation. And then while you're out on the floor, believe me, people will leave dumbbells, they'll leave medicine balls, sand bells, all kinds of small implements, water bottles on the floor. They'll spill water and just keep walking. They might leave their bag on the floor. Outside of a cycle studio, there's a bunch of shoes and bags. You have to be aware of that and be able to navigate that with your clients. Some of your clients will be able to recognize that readily, and that's not going to be an issue. But some people are just oblivious, and you have to just take them like a tugboat and drag them through the facility and make sure you steer them away from those hazards. So each facility, and if you've worked out in different gyms, you know this, will have its own kind of personality and its own ecosystem, meaning you have these principal players, you have plate head, your plate head workout person in there, you have the social butterfly who's in there chit-chatting, you have the person who likes to do the dynamic workouts that include 4 different pieces of exercise equipment. You go to get on something and across a gym, they tell you that they're on it. So you have all these different players that are in the facility. And believe me, you have the same cast of characters, it's just different building. So after you've worked there for a while, it becomes apparent who are people that you can work with. And then there's also people you have to work around. There are people who are very gracious. You might go up and say, hey, look, I'm looking to do a superset here, or I'm working on lat pull down and tricep push down. I'm doing a superset back and forth. And the person will be gracious and say, okay, great, I can go to this piece of equipment over here. Whereas you might have somebody else who will just walk up and completely just take over and commandeer a piece of equipment. So you get to the point where you know these people and you know where they are, and you can kind of pick them out across a gym, and you can plan your workouts around the people who are the knuckleheads and the people who are actually the nice people. A good example of some of the behavioral things you'll see from individuals: you'll get the big plate head in there chucking the dumbbells after doing a dumbbell bench press, dropping a barbell after doing bicep curls, or perhaps throwing medicine balls around in a high traffic area like the dumbbell area of a fitness facility. Those are higher risk type of behaviors that, again, you can't control, but you can steer yourself and your client away from. And believe me, I've seen it all. I've seen people do the craziest of stuff, and I tend to steer my people away from that type of behavior. Now, as the trainer is the professional, and the professional gets to choose what they want to do. And part of this is proper and prudent programming. And here's wonderful examples. Taking an 80-year-old client who has never worked out before and asking her to do like box jumps or trying to do very high intensity exercises. That is putting a person at a very high risk environment and one that is not safe. So other examples include having a client do overly complex exercises. You see trainers in the facility so often where they try to be the most creative person in there, and they're doing the most creative exercises, but they're exercises that really have no value, and they actually do nothing more than increase the risk value or risk level as opposed to the actual value of the session. Part of this is you have to be able to introduce, teach, and cue exercises correctly. If you have difficulty doing so, I highly, highly suggest you learn that skill, because the ability to demonstrate and cue people correctly, both verbal, nonverbal, hands-on cueing, is going to be crucial to being successful. And then when you look at some of the exercise patterns, many times it requires an educational timeline, if you will, where if it's a whole part whole philosophy, you're teaching the smaller components earlier on to then bring into play a more complex movement pattern at a different date where their body then is very familiar with the movement pattern without having actually done it previously. A good example is doing like partial movement patterns for complex exercises like running technique or power clean, and then you eventually have your clients do power clean or do sprinting later on. But the idea is use a whole part whole to teach incrementally a very complex movement. And then lastly, I can't stress this enough. I mean, believe me, I have clients that I can push to the edge of the envelope and they eat every bit of it up and they love it. And I know how hard I can push them. But there's a point where I know I cannot have my clients do a very highly complex movement while they um, are in an exhausted state. I'll fix that. And the challenge you're going to have on that is you have to have some history with your clients to know what they can do, what they can't do, how hard you can push them, and what their actual limitations are. That takes time and relationship building with your client. All right. So this is not exhaustive. You're going to run into so much stuff in the fitness facility I can't even tell you, and you'll never be blown away by it because it's always going to be something new. It is an important part of the relationship. And again, your clients will come in and they will really not have a concept of this. This will operate behind the scenes until there's a very apparent situation where you steer your client away from a risky situation and they're aware of it. Otherwise, your goal is to provide a safe workout environment, have good situational awareness, and don't put them in a high risk situation where they run a risk of injury because, quite frankly, an injured client is no client at all. They won't come back or they'll be out for a while. So your goal is to really recognize potential hazards, mitigate that risk by steering your client away from it. And then beyond that, a well thought out training program and understanding the capabilities of your client is crucial. To have Ida, the 80-year-old female client who just gets done playing bridge and ask her to do box jumps and power cleans, it's nonsense. Oh, we're going to have you stand on physio ball today. Having never done any physio ball exercises before is nonsense. So realize that it's also a programming component that helps increase the level of safety and mitigate the level of risk. All right, guys, I'm going to sign off. Have yourself a good one. Bye now.